Hi everyone, welcome to Bloomerang Academy, and thank you everyone for joining us today from all over. Today we are talking about list segmentation. I know we have a lot to cover. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, our product analyst, Heidi Atkinson. Hi Heidi.
Hi. Thanks for the introduction, Diana. Thanks for everybody who's coming today. Like we said, I'm going to be talking about list segmentation today, so I'm really excited to kind of lead this class for the first time, so it'll be really great to go through it together with all of you. I work at Bloomerang on the product team as the product analyst, and I've been in various other roles on the team. I've worked at several nonprofits before, so I'm somewhat basing some of this on my personal experience doing segmented appeal letters and segmented thank you letters. But just because I've done something doesn't always mean it's, the only way to do something. So I want to share a little bit more of a broad structure for doing segmentation together with all of you. Speaking of where we all live, like I used to live up in South Bend, Indiana. And I'm currently in upstate New York in Niskayuna. So pretty clear here today, just sharing in with the general weather updates from everybody, and sometimes missing the Midwest, but today it's pretty good out here. So let's go ahead and dig in. While I'm getting started kind of talking through today's agenda, I think I had a poll that Diana helped me put together for all of you, where I wanted to just kind of assess like what everybody's experience is with doing list segmentation for appeals for letters. Are you kind of like new to the concept and like getting ready to kind of start dabbling in it? Do you do it sometimes? Are you like a power segmenter who's always, just finding every opportunity to use this technique? Just go ahead and share that in the poll for the next minute or so while I talk through the agenda, and then we'll just kind of touch back and see what everybody's experiences. That'll help us with this class a little bit today, but obviously with future classes to make sure we know who you are and what your experience is. So for today, I'm going to talk through kind of three major zones of segmentation. One, I'm going to talk about strategy. I've got some PowerPoint slides up here today ready of just like how to think about it, how to tackle it, some brainstorming ideas for getting started, and staying organized about it, which is for me always one of the most valuable things. Is as long as I'm organized, everything else, once you hit Bloomerang or your database, is going to like flow really smoothly. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here in the slides just kind of talking about the backstory of how to get into segmentation. Then we're going to hop over into my demo database, and I'm going to do the most basic beginning because I'm kind of presuming through all of this that we're talking about like an appeal letter, so something that you're going to mail out. So I'm going to talk about really just getting that first list of here's everybody who's going to get this appeal, and getting that kind of starter list put together and some basic tips for that. That shouldn't take too long, it's so easy. So most of the class then will be kind of going through like once we have that global list of who do you want to get this mailing, breaking that out. And for my purposes today, I'm going to walk fully through an example of doing a 4-part segmentation where I'm going to pretend that I'm sending my appeal to, I'm going to break it up into 4 different versions of my letter. One for non-donors, one for people who've lapsed, one for people who are brand new, and this is kind of maybe my first opportunity to ask them again, and then everybody else, which is going to be kind of my up-to-date donors. So that's the structure of what we're covering today. Feel free to hop out if that kind of scares you off. And it's totally not what you're here for, but I think that was pretty clear from the description. So I hope I'm hitting what you expected today. Diana, how did that poll go?
We have a handful who are pros at segmentation, but otherwise it's a pretty even split between the beginners and intermediates.
Okay, so I'm hoping there'll be something useful for everybody here. Feel free to take the parts that are most useful for you, and there'll be a recording, so you can always kind of come back and re-listen through different parts if we're going kind of fast for what you're ready for today, but you want to come back to it in the future. Let me get started then with strategy for list segmentation. So like I kind of mentioned in my plan, there's always this starter list, this like, what are the overall criteria for who's going to get this mailing? And if you're doing an email appeal, exact same kind of logic here, just ignore all the stuff about addresses. But this is kind of where you're saying, like, some people just aren't supposed to get my mailing. Like, I want to send this to people who have a mailing address, of course, or an email if you're doing an email appeal. People who've said it's okay to get mail from me, or okay to get email if you're doing an email appeal. People who are still okay getting solicited, people who are alive. Some really basic universal criteria that I think will probably apply to all of you. So that's what I'm going to be covering in the demo database. And then over here on the right, I've got some optional ideas. I think for every organization, you'll probably have in your own heads somebody who you're maybe tracking in your database or in your system, but doesn't necessarily need to get this appeal letter. You know, I've seen scenarios where we've kind of said, I know I'm sending this appeal letter out this week. I don't want it to go to somebody who's a brand new donor. I want their next touch to us to be on the kind of like new donor cultivation path, not this more global appeal letter. So maybe you take those universal criteria and you add on some more elements, like unless they're new donors, or maybe the board members don't need to get this mailed to them, so we kick the board members out. Maybe people who, you know, are in my monthly giving club don't need to get this particular appealed mailing, or maybe they're one of your segments, which we'll get to in a second. So there's kind of like of everybody who's in my database, not all of them are probably going to get the mailing, but some of them will, and you're going to kind of work through your strategy on what's this big old list of every letter we're going to send out and get that worked out. Like I said, for me today, we're going to be doing kind of this side of it. Here's some ideas of other things that you might do in your organization, and this is, you know, an incomplete list. There's a lot of reasons somebody might not be who you want to be sending an appeal letter to, but might deserve to be in your system, and only you will know what those are. Once you've got your list put together, I think most of you are probably pretty comfortable with this, but I did want to touch on it. It's just like, what do we mean by list segmentation then? How complicated, how crazy is this? And it's really, at its core, a very simple concept. It's that we're creating a different message based on something we know about the recipient in order to increase the effectiveness of our appeal. And the differences don't have to be big here. It might be you just say, thank you for your latest gift on this date for people who have a latest gift, and you don't put that sentence in for people who have never given before. You know, how different these letters are doesn't have to be very different if that difference is able to increase your effectiveness. And this is also going to come into play in the next couple of slides where we talk about some ideas for what should you segment based on. You know, it should be something you know about them. You can't really segment based on their, you know, square footage of their house if you don't know the square footage of their house. And it should be something that's useful. Like, even if I know the square footage of your house, that still might be a very useless thing to segment my appeal based on if it's not actually leading me to give them a more compelling pitch or a more personalized pitch and improving my response rates to my appeal. So it can be pretty simple, but it's going to be basically following this essential structure. So some of those ideas, I'm not going to get into a lot of these scenarios today because there's so many things you can segment based on, but this was just browsing like my own colleagues, browsing the internet, you know, looking at some of our customers' appeals here at Bloomerang. A lot of options. It's really the sky's the limit. You can send different variations of your letter to monthly donors, to your in-kind donors, based on how recent their last gift was. Maybe your volunteers get a different letter. If you've got, for example, an alumni association, maybe you send a different letter based on whether they have a child currently in your school, or if they're an alumni, how many kids they have in the school. If you do client services, maybe you appeal to your past clients differently than you appeal to somebody who's never been a client but supports your mission. There's all the donor size different things. If if your staff are donating to you, there's so many things you can segment on. And I think this is where I run into a little bit of analysis paralysis of, oh my gosh, I need to do all these different segments. And that's where it really helps me to go back to that, like, what do I kind of have the capability of doing right now? What's reasonable? And is my letter going to be that much more effective if I could send these people a different letter? And once something passes those tests, then yeah, go ahead. Segment based on everything. Test it out. See how it goes. I think once you've kind of like gone through that brainstorming, you're going to want to put out a little bit of notes about your plan of what does that mean to you. So like I had major donors on there, or maybe a volunteer. How are you going to define that in your system? So in my case, for my plan today, I'm going to be sending out to non-donors. Like I have no transactions in my system at all. And the difference in my letter might be that you might ask them for their first gift. You might mention, make your first gift. So you basically, how am I defining that they're a non-donor? Pretty straightforward. Lapsed donor is another segment I'm going to be setting up today. And this one's very, fuzzy. What's your definition of lapsed? I'm going to say that they haven't given any gifts since September 1st, 2019. That was about a year ago from when I was preparing this class. So about a year ago from when I was preparing this letter. Your definition of lapsed donor might be longer term. You might say like, hey, their last gift was like on August 31st last year. They're not really going to respond as well to the lapsed person message as to the current donor message. So this is really getting to at like that subjectiveness of how different is my letter going to be? What words do I want to put into that letter, and will those make sense to the person receiving it? I'm going to define new donors essentially as they've given since September 1st, 2019, just because that made sense to me putting out to this class. You might have it be a little bit nearer term of like, oh, new donors if like their first gift was in the last 30 days. And then I just have this end segment, which I'm calling current donors, but it's essentially everybody else. They should be getting my appeal. They're in my database, but they didn't match any of these three groups, so they're kind of my everybody else group. And de facto what that means, because of how I'm defining these other three, is that they gave me a gift prior to September 1st last year, and they've given me a gift since September 1st last year. So they're kind of a recurring donor. Or they have been a recurring donor in the past. So they're just kind of my default everybody else. And your appeal will probably have something like this too, of like, I'm going to send a special letter to this group and a special letter to this group. And then just like the remainder will all get the final version of the letter, or maybe the most generic. But if they have something in common, if they do all match definition, you can make it more than generic again, of like, hey, you've been giving forever and like, we still need you, you're the best. Another thing to be planning about then, once you've kind of hit that point, you know what your definitions are, you know which segments you're going to be sending. In my case, all my segments are based on very similar data. When was their last gift? It was never, it was before this date, it was after this date. But if you get into some of those really fun segments, like, oh, but are they a volunteer? Are they a major donor? Are they a current family of my school? You will probably end up with scenarios where you have a donor who could meet multiple of those different situations. They could have gotten, logically, any of those versions of your letter. So as part of your planning, if you're doing some of those fun segments, I would definitely encourage just real quick, like I did this in a pretty software, so I was hoping it's easy to read, but you just pull out some scrap paper and jot it down. Just a little flow chart of like, hey, they might meet multiple of these, but like which version of the letter am I choosing to send them? I'm going to send them the major donor version of the letter, even though they could have reasonably gotten the volunteer version or the alumni version, but like I can only send them one because it's going to be really weird if they get three. So what I did here is I kind of just said like, hey, here's everybody. And then my first question is going to be, have they ever given? If not, I send them the non-donor letter. If yes, I go and ask the second question. And if you're doing a more kind of complex, not mutually exclusive rules where somebody could meet multiple rules, something like this will kind of be a nice way for you to visualize how you're planning out of like who's going to get which version. Major donors first come first. If they're a major donor, they're getting the major donor letter, even if they would have met my criteria for any of my other letters further on in my whole flow. I did this kind of as a test case. It's a very simple little flow chart. But for those of you who are kind of getting like a little sophisticated with it, you might even have branches, like they're a new donor and their first gift was over $100 or under $100. And you can get really nice and customized with all those different variations. Once again, based on what is your bandwidth, what is your capacity to do all those different versions, to juggle all those different scenarios, to keep organized, and how different is the letter going to be, and do you have cause to believe that that difference will improve your fundraising. So this is a place where you start getting a little bit of like, oh my gosh, that's so much. And it can be if you're not being organized. But if you are, then it's very simple. You just come and say, yep, this is which version of the letter everybody's getting. So my scenario is kind of simple, but I think it looks pretty. I hope you guys find that helpful. All right. Let me see. That was what I wanted to plan out in the slides. If you guys have any questions or any notes about what works for you of who you're planning on segmenting for, who you've segmented for in the recent past, if there's like some really fun scenarios you've done that I didn't mention, feel free to chat those, share them with everybody else in the meeting. And if there's anything that was a little unclear or that you have questions on about that section, feel free to chat those in as well, and Diana and I'll take a look at it. So that's kind of how you'll start thinking about your segmenting. What I'm going to do now is hop over into my demo database. I'm going to say, like, I've already got my plan. You guys kind of saw, my notes about my plan. And I'm going to start with that master mailing list. Like, this is my global list, everybody who's going to get my letter, which in my case is just essentially going to be a very universal set of criteria, since I don't have real donors to worry about. So let me hop over here. This is my Bloomerang demo database, and where I'm going to spend our class today is over here in the report section. This is where I can do my filters, my columns, my criteria building, and flesh that all out. If you're sending the letters through Bloomerang, you can do all of these same things as well in the letters section, but you can also build out the report like I'm doing today, and then tie it back to letters, tie it back to emails. But this is kind of where my brain goes for, like, this is where I organize my thoughts around the filters and the criteria. And I'm just choosing to do it here today for you. So nothing magic about reports versus doing the same filters in other places in the system. So what I'm going to do today is just walk through building from scratch. I already probably have one in here from when I was preparing for the class, but I figured showing you how I got through the steps will make the most sense. So you saw I clicked the new button. At this point, I'm going to select to build a report from scratch. Our two most common types of reports that people like to make are constituent reports, a list of donors, a list of people, and transaction reports, a list of gifts. Now, you might be thinking, like, yeah, I'm going to send this to people who've given a gift. I'll pull a transaction report. I'll base it off their transaction history. I would advise, though, on doing this as a constituent report. If somebody's given multiple gifts, or like in my case, I want to send this letter to people who've given no gifts, a constituent report can handle both of those scenarios in one place. It's also just nice and easy for, like, everybody should get one letter. So we're going to build a constituent report. At this point, we're dealing with all of our default columns. By default, we don't have any filters applied. You'll remember in the slides, I kind of walked through the really basic filters. I'm sending this out as a letter. They should have an address. They should be okay with getting mail from me. They should be okay with getting solicited, and they should probably be alive. So those are the filters we're going to add here. Let me go ahead and get started then. So right now I have 345 people in my entire database. We're going to start seeing that list go down as I start narrowing my criteria for who should get this mailing. My first one is going to be that I only want people who have good addresses. So for that, I'm going to click the green add filter. I'm going to type in address here. You'll see it starts with has address. And once I have this open, I'll be able to kind of drill down a little bit further to say, and it's a good primary address. So that's just a little kind of like fun tip of, like, when you're looking for they're mailable, this is how you'll do it. You'll start by grabbing this address filter. So right now, if I just stopped here, it would say they have some kind of address of some kind on their record. It might include bad addresses. How I'm going to filter this down even further is I'm going to click here. You see any place in reports where we have this little down arrow, that means there's even more drill down, even more logistics you can get into, which is really fun to explore and play around with and kind of discover what's in there. So I'm going to change that from general addresses specifically, and now I've untapped these address filters. So this is where I'm going to be able to say address specific things. So I want people who have an address, and it's got to be their primary address. Yep, the address is primary, click OK. And the primary address has to be a good address. So we have that marked as like is bad, is a little checkbox on every address. So I'm going to say is, and once again, we got that little down arrow. I'm just going to flip that to is not. bad. So now what you're seeing is once I apply this filter and click OK, we're going to see this number of 345 go down because I'll only be looking at people who have a primary address that is good. Repeated that about 5 times now in different ways, so I'll just move ahead. All right, that kicked out a lot of people. I have a lot of bad data in my demo database here. We're going to further refine this to people who are okay with getting mail and okay with being solicited, okay with getting asked to give money. You're probably going to be tracked in your system in this field called communication restrictions. This is a built-in field that every Bloomerang database has, so that's generally where you're probably going to be seeing this tracked by anybody else at your organization. If you converted your data, that's probably where we put that information when you started up with Bloomerang. You might have more custom restrictions. Like I've seen people who have a field that says like this person's okay with getting asked once a year, or they're okay with getting sent newsletters but no other mail. You'd probably see that if you look at a constituent's profile and you scroll down to where you have their custom field data. If you see something like that in your system, you can add a filter here for that as well. But most of you aren't going to have that. For most of you, this built-in field is going to be all you need to do. Just going to flag that because some of you, I'm guessing, do have nice built-up data sets with more specific scenarios. All right, so I'm going to say their communication restriction is do not mail, do not solicit. Now, this is actually the opposite of what I wanted to click. I'm sorry. This is now showing me only people who don't want to be mailed. So I'm just going to grab this gray restriction here and move it down from my include rules to my exclude rules. So I didn't mean to do it this way. It's a little jarring from my original plan, but essentially what I had right is about 100 people who have a good address, and then of those 100, I'm kicking out the people who are not okay with getting mailed and are not okay with getting solicited. So now I'm down to 86 people who have a good address. They haven't told me they don't want to be mailed. They haven't told me they don't want to be solicited. As far as I know, they're still happy to hear from me, happy to support me. And then the last thing I'm going to filter out at this point is people who are deceased. So similar here to how we are kicking out from this list anybody who doesn't want to be contacted, we're also going to kick out people whose status is deceased. Status is another one of these fields that's a built-in Bloomerang field. All of you have it, and it's the best place to go and mark that somebody is deceased. And turns out I didn't have anybody in that particular subgroup, but that's a great way you can double check. And you should probably do that anytime you're doing an outbound communications, just filter for that. Similarly, your organization might be using the inactive status. I'm personally not using it, but if you're using that, filter them out too if you don't want them to be getting the communication. That was what I wanted to cover in terms of this base list. So essentially at this point, I have 86 people in my database who qualify to get this appeal letter from me. And from this point on in the class, I'm going to be breaking those 86 down into the different segments of which version of the letter they're going to get. But this is like real basic setup you're probably going to want to do up front. Do we have any questions before I move on from this section?
Thanks, Heidi. How do addresses get marked as bad?
Oh yeah, like up here where I've got this one where I said like, and the primary address is not bad. That's a good question. There's two different ways where you might be having addresses marked as bad. One is you can go to an address record personally in Bloomerang and just click the checkbox, go edit it, change it, say that it's a bad address, and then it's marked as bad. The other is if you turn on the automatic NCOA integration, which is over here in your settings, then every night you'll get an address scan and you'll get the most up-to-date address from the US Post Office, and they'll mark addresses as bad if they can't find a better address for the person they know that they no longer live there. So that could be automated for you, or you can do it by hand. Good question. I probably should keep moving. That was about half of our time so far, so I'm going to start moving to the segments. I know that there's a few more questions, so Diane, I'll see you in the chat, and I'm going to keep going with this. So at this point, I'm going to save this. This is kind of like my main list. This is my global list. And I'm going to just save that, give it a little name here. That's going to be my 2020 Fall Appeal full list. We'll just call it that, and we'll call everything today our 2020 Fall Appeal so we can see them all together. Let me go ahead and save that and go to my reports list. So that's my full list, and now I'm going to break it down into 4 other lists. There's 2 main ways I can take all that work I just did and move it into another list. One is that I can reference that report when I'm building a second report, which I will show you how to do. And the other is that I could take that main list and then make a copy of it and then modify that copy, which is mostly what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. But first, let me show you how reference reports would work. So let's say I built that, I'm making a new constituent list. I say like, hey, I just built out like some really nice filters. It was exactly what I wanted, and I want those people. That's my mailing list. That's my go-to mailing list, and I want to start with that. So I can say here that I only want people in this report who are also in that report. So to do that, I would say report is in a constituent report, since this is a constituent report, and then I go select my 2020 Fall Appeal full list, which is what I just built. So this is one way that you can like work out a sophisticated set of criteria in one place, and then you don't have to do all that typing over and over if you're going to make multiple segments or if you're going to send multiple emails or multiple letters. You can build that report and then just reference that anywhere else in the system where you're doing filtering. Click OK, and just like that, instead of having to like type out all 4 of those filters, I'm just now in essentially one filter getting back to those same 86 people. So this is really nice if you're going to be doing something like this over and over throughout the year. This is just my go-to, like, you know, these people are okay to get mail. Global criteria, you can work that all out in one place and then just kind of reference it over and over throughout your day. Reference reports are great for like that kind of repeated use, that like I've got something built up over here, but now I realize I want it over there, or I worked out something really sophisticated and I don't want to have to do all of that kind of clicking over and over again. But like I said, I'm going to actually be doing copies today. So let me cancel out of this, go back to my 2020 report. Oops, I didn't want to make a new report. I'm just clicking all over the place today. That's because I'm on the new report page. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. So I'm going to go to my 2020 Fall Appeal full list. You can see here I did a similar thing up in the spring. And I'm going to take that list that I made, and I'm just going to, right here from the list, I click on this little blue arrow over here and I copy it. This is the only path for copying, so if you've got the report open, you won't see this necessarily. But as soon as you've saved it, you'll be able to come over here to the report list and make your copy. And so for my first one, I'm going to make my non-donor list, so just so you know where we're about to go. So I've made my copy, the screen kind of flashes, I'm back on the full list, and I click Fall Appeal, and now you see I've got that full list we just made together, and then I've got the copy right here. So I'm going to click and open and start editing this copy. The nice thing about copying is it keeps all of the columns as well. We hadn't set up any really nice columns in our report yet, but you're going to see this kind of play out as I do them here in this report, and then we'll kind of see them brought over into all the rest. So you see it's still got all the same filters we worked out together, and now I'm going to basically modify this to just be my non-donors. So instead of full list, I'm just going to go here and tell myself this is my non-donors. Go ahead and save that so that we see which one we're working on today or at this moment. And basically it's the same list as what we had before, and they don't have any transactions. So I'm just going to, similar to what we did with the addresses, I'm going to start typing transactions. And I'm going to change this little green guy from has any to has no transactions. And voila, I've got the set of my mailing list that doesn't have any transactions. So now we're down to 16 people. I wanted to point out to some of those cleanup kind of things to organizing the report that are going to pay off when we copy. So for one thing, I've been working this whole time with constituent filters. That means that if I have two people in my database who are in a family together and they both meet the criteria for this report, I'll see one row for each of them. I'm not spotting any right here. Oh, this looks like it. Chris and Dewey look like they probably live together. They only need to get one copy of my letter, even though they both meet these filters. So if I change this green constituent to household, so once again, I'm looking for that magic little down arrow, it doesn't change the filters. It's not going to kick anybody out of the report, but it'll take anybody who lives together and it'll condense them down into just one row, which is exactly what I want for letters. I'm happy that they all meet the filters. I only want to send them one letter. So I'm going to go ahead and click household. And it looks like I don't have those two in a household together. So that might be a little bit of data cleanup I could do. But you see my report did go down to 15. So somebody else in here got collapsed now into a household. So we cleaned up that, and then I want to clean up my columns just a little bit. Because I'm talking about this as a physical mailing, I'm just going to go ahead and drop the email column. So you click on the blue column, and I'm going to click delete. And then let's say I was going to do some merge fields in my letter for like what's their lifetime giving, maybe what's their latest gift date. These people are non-donors, but in general, I know I'm going to want that in my letters. I can click this add column, and I'm just going to grab in here lifetime revenue and what's their latest gift date, and go ahead and add those columns. Now, if you're running these as letters in Bloomerang, you don't have to add columns to your reports. You can automate those merge fields into the letter over here. But let's say you were going to export these lists and you're going to do a mail merge, maybe with Microsoft Word or something. You'll want to have those merge columns all kind of included in your report before you send it out of Bloomerang and into a spreadsheet. So let me go ahead and save what I've done here with the non-donors. So basically at this point, I've got my non-donor letters. I've got the columns I want. I've got household set up. I don't want to necessarily have to make those changes in my next segment. So that's where saving this, going to my report list, and copying is going to come into play. So at this point, when I go and look for my fall appeal, my non-donor list, copy that because it has all the columns, all the householding that we wanted to do. Like we said, when we copy things, then we have to go look for them again. So now I'm going to take my non-donors list. I'm going to change this to my lapsed donor list, and we're going to pull that segment together. And so essentially what we're going to be saying is, if they've given no transactions, we don't want them to be in this version of the letter. So we're going to click this gray box, drag it back down here to an exclude filter. They are already getting different versions, so now we're seeing back to kind of like, here's everybody in the list, and now I want to just see the ones who have lapsed. So here I'm going to add a filter. It's going to be a transaction filter again, but a little bit different than the first one we did, where I'm going to say they specifically don't have a transaction in the last year. So they have no transactions, no specific transactions, where the transaction date, and this is where, like I said, in my world, I'm going to say is since September 1st, 2019. So I'm going to say is between 9/1/2019. And even though it says between, by leaving the second one blank, it's essentially working like date is since 9/1/2019. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK again, and now I'm seeing just the people in my database who have given a gift, because if they hadn't given a gift, they were getting the first version of the letter. But they haven't, I'm now filtering down for just the ones who haven't given a gift recently, which, as you see, is a lot of my demo data. So these are my people where they're going to get my lapsed version of the letter. Hey, it's been a while. We miss you. You should give again. That's pretty much all we need to do to set up that version of the letter. Any questions about that section?
We're good for now.
All right. We're going to save that with our name lapsed. We're going to go and make a copy of that back to our report list. So 2020 Fall Appeal, we're going to make the third segment of our letter. I'm going to copy. Open up that copy. We're going to rename this. This is going to be the version of our letter that we're sending to new donors. Or first-time donors, recent first-time donors. So at this point, you'll be seeing we're doing kind of like the same technique for each segment. We're making a copy, giving it the new name, modifying the filters, moving on to the next one. And so like what you saw before is I'm going to take that filter that I said for the previous version and drag it down here to the exclude. So basically making sure like every household is only getting one copy of the letter. So now we're seeing of those 83-ish people we started with, this is how many we're left with. If you're down to 6, you might not be doing segmentation using filters anymore, but bear with me with my little database. So these are our people who they have given a gift, and they have given a gift since September 1st of last year, and now I just want the people whose first gift was since September 1st last year. So it's going to look very similar to what we just did for the lapsed people. I'm going to go back to my handy dandy has transactions filter. I'm going to change the has any to the first, which is a nice little filter for exactly this purpose. So these are people whose first gift is dated. And I want to pause here and mention why I'm using this date field. As you see, there's a lot of different transaction date fields. Created date is when you put it in the database, whereas date is what day the donor gave you the gift. So like if they sent you the gift on December 31st, you put it in the database, let's say on January 3rd, you're going to want to kind of talk with the donor about the gift in the terms of when they sent it to you, of what that gift date was from their point of view. So that's why I keep using the date field instead of, for example, created date. So their first gift is, and then we're going to do that same trick we did of between 9/1/2019 and don't put anything over here in this box. So this is essentially now saying their first gift is since 9/1/2019. Go ahead, click OK a couple times. Wow, I have one. So yeah, this is one place too where you're going to kind of decide what your segments are based off of what those volume numbers are in your system. If you have exactly one person who meets that segment, maybe that's not something you necessarily need to prioritize into building out all those little custom grids of who meets what criteria. But this is a demonstration, so we're all good. So we're going to go ahead and save the new donors one, and we're going to wrap up here with the last one that I promised, the fourth segment, the kind of everybody else, everybody who's left. So if we go back to our fall appeal, we took our full list, we identified and took out the people who have never donated, the people who are lapsed donors, the people who are new donors. The last group we have left is going to be, by definition, all of our kind of up-to-date current, they've been around for a while donors. So we're going to copy that most recent report we made, the new donors one. We're going to go and open that copy, and we're going to call it what I've been choosing to call it, the current donors. Go ahead and save that new name. And essentially all we have to do for this last report is grab that criteria we used for the previous segment, drag it down here, and you see we're left with the 5 households who meet this last group of definition. They were in our first initial group, and they're not in any of the 3 other segments we're sending to. So that is our final segment. That's everybody who's left. How are we doing over in the chat?
Doing great. Lots of great questions. Thanks, Heidi. We do have questions of, we're running reports here, but how do we get these into a letter?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I've been talking about this right because your end goal isn't just to build a report and a list somewhere in your system. Your end goal is to send something to the donor. So there's a couple different ways you can get this into a letter. Like I kind of mentioned, if you're not sending it through Bloomerang, if you're using an outside tool, you can take any of these reports you made in Bloomerang. You can export them to Excel. So that'll basically be everything you're seeing here, the columns you added here, the rows you're seeing here, in a spreadsheet that you can then use with wherever you're building those letters. But if you're using the Bloomerang letter tool, and I know we had a class last week on building appeal letters, we had a class I think 2 weeks ago on like intro to Bloomerang letters, so we've been producing a lot of letter content these days. If you come here to the letters, when you are creating a letter, so for example, let me just grab this one. The letters all have a filter tab that works exactly like what we've been seeing over in the report. So you've got the exact same include, exclude, households. You can reference one of those reports you built over here. So you can build it all here in letters, which is one technique. Or if you built it all here in reports while you were kind of working out your like who should get what, then once you have that report built, if you come over here to letters, you can do that same referencing technique. So you can say is in that report that I built. So if you've done all the hard work, you've built the report, maybe you've been following along during this class, and now you're like, wait, but I wanted this over my letter tools. Don't worry, save the report, come over here, and then you can say is in that 2020 fall appeal. You don't have to build the report first. You could have built it here, but if you do have the report built, you can reference it over here, no problem. And that works just the same way as when we referenced it over in the reports. The one big difference, if you're using the Bloomerang letter tool, you do not need to worry at all about the columns for the report. Or like when you're building the report, you don't have to do this constituent household toggle in the report, because when you come here to the letter tool, those are all kind of built into the process of building a letter. And in the letter class, I know we kind of talked through about a lot of those. You don't have to know ahead of time exactly all the merge fields and pick them all out and get them all lined up, because when you're here designing and building a letter, you can build in those merge fields automatically. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm seeing a question here from Sarah about like a way to add our own filters to constituents. Yeah, for universal purposes today, I stuck with using filters that I know are universal in everybody's databases. You all have a status field. You all have the communication restrictions field. You all have the has transactions and the has addresses, kind of sub-filters, because they're universal to every database. But if you are using any special unique information, I mentioned like maybe you're tracking volunteers, maybe you're tracking alumni, those aren't universal, but you can create custom fields in your database to track those. You've got unlimited custom fields. So I might have like a constituent custom field saying this person is a former program participant, or this person is a volunteer. I might track volunteers on my interactions. Once you have a field for that, you can put that data into the system, and any custom fields you have data for, you can reference in filters in your reports, you can reference them in your emails, you can make them merge fields in your letters, which is awesome. So in my database, I think I have a custom field here for, yeah, like I've got birth year, I've got giving capacity, I have an ask amount custom field. That's an awesome one for appeal letters. Once you have the data there, then when you're building a filter for a constituent report or adding a column, you just type that in. So I would say like, I want to filter based on solicitor is filled out. So that's an easy way to get that kind of really custom information that's going to be unique to you or your kind of organization, but not necessarily to all Bloomerang customers, and how you can really make the system work for you. Good question.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Sarah. We have a question here as well. You're filtering for has specific transactions. Does that include soft credits or pledges?
Oh, that's a great question. I should go back to the report where I was filtering for that. So let's say my non-donors report was the first one. So in Bloomerang, the word transactions is kind of like an umbrella word. It encompasses several different kinds of transaction. We have donations, which are pretty straightforward, but you might also in your system be using pledges and pledge payments, recurring gift schedules and recurring gift payments, and you might be using soft credits. All of those different things count as a transaction. So if I say has no transactions, I mean they don't have a donation, they don't have a pledge, they've never signed up for recurring giving, they don't even have a soft credit on their record. So that's what the general has no transaction covers, all those different scenarios. That's a really fun one too to explore for like based on your organization and how you're using, for example, soft credits, how you're using pledges, what kind of segmentation you're doing, you might say, like, I want to send a different version of my letter to somebody who has a pledge, to somebody who has a soft credit. You can really drill down, where I'm just kind of staying high level right here in this particular class with like has no transactions, but you can get into like has no transactions where the type is once again this Bloomerang built-in field you've all got, where the type is donation, or they don't have any gifts that are recurring gift schedules, which is where they kind of say like, I'm going to give you $60 a month, or recurring gift payments where they say, and here it is. So these are the different types of transaction. They're all included in this umbrella term transaction. Good question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heidi. That was a lot of great content. And thank you everyone as well for your questions. We also had some comments about some of the segments people have tried. They've used the live bunch segments. That's pretty popular. We see that a lot from our customers as well. I also wanted to say that a lot of you have asked about the letter piece to this in particular, so I put the link to our solicitation mailing class in the chat, which is kind of like the companion class to this one.
Yeah, in the solicitation mailing class, we really delve into like over here in the letter tool, how do you start a new letter? How do you do merge fields? How do you do formatting? How do you run the letter? And we really didn't touch on all of the filters and segmentation. Just because we knew it was too much to cover both things in one session together. So I've got some links here. Keeping on that theme of letters, we have a bunch of help articles too about different areas of letters. So if like watching the class isn't really your cup of tea and you just want to go browse and read some things, the help articles are very comprehensive. And these are very focused on like our letter building tool in app. We also have a bunch of help articles, Diane, I think you've written a lot of these that are really advanced filtering. So like you might have felt, some of these filters have a lot deeper you can go with them. There's a lot of really cool customization you can do, and I couldn't cover it all here, but a lot of scenarios are covered in these help articles. And every Academy webinar we've ever had is recorded and saved here as well. So if you want to share this class, if you want to see any of the more recent classes that you might have missed, they're all right there. Those are our resources. They're very Bloomerang focused, but as I was preparing for this class, I really enjoyed a lot of these resources, which are also available like from consultants from the Bloomerang blog. So I wanted to pull them together, so they're going to be in the slides when you get these after the class as well. Just different things for like, what do you say in the letters? How do you do this? What do you want to do for this? So they really get more at the like big picture strategy, whereas I was trying to stick today with a very technical, like once you know what you're going to do, here's where to go click in your database. So some resources for that too. And that wraps up everything I'd prepared for today.
So thank you again for being with us today. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.